guys, we're gonna have a quick chat today about some squat assessment stuff that you guys can do. This is particularly useful if you coach anyone for any kind of squatting, or if you're having trouble squatting yourself, you might find this useful. So first three things we need to consider before we get into any actual kind of drills or coaching stuff is, one, take into account specificity. We've talked about this in other videos. How much do you need to squat for what you're trying to do? Like if you're a competitive powerlifter, you obviously have to squat with a bar below parallel to comp standards and comp equipment. So that's going to vary what you need to do. Then you have to be able to barbell back squat below parallel, pain-free, hopefully. Otherwise, you're not going to get any fucking training done. However, if you're just wanting super jacked legs, are there any squat variants aside from barbell back squat you could do? Totally, front squat, safety bar stuff, and any kind of single leg stuff. But again, as long as we have something in there that we can load quite heavily, but it opens up a bunch more avenues when we don't have to have that restriction on it, like barbell back squat below parallel. Other things would be, goals kind of ties into specificity a bit as well, but same principle of there will be a time limit on when you need to be able to squat and how much and how deep, etc., by a time, because you'll have a competition date. The last thing to really consider before we get people squatting is injury history, because that can save us a lot of time in terms of having to screen them for varying things. Like if somebody comes to you and has had like a flap tear in their meniscus repaired, or they have a full ACL reconstruction or something, they obviously might be a bit ginger on their knee, depending on how fresh either of those injuries kind of are, and you're probably going to have to take some consideration with that. So with that all done, let's get on to some drills. So common issues, now that we've covered, or hopefully covered, why on how you should be squatting and what your kind of targets are for what you need to do to squat, are going to be, you need to kind of section them off into two kind of groups and assess where people fall. It's mainly not even on two groups, it's probably more just on a spectrum where you would fall. You tend to get people who are either really mobile and lack a lot of stability and control, or super immobile and can't move for shit. So a good way to kind of determine which one of those are is using passive active screening. Passive being in a relaxed and supported state, can the joint action occur? So like right now, I'm sitting on this box, my hip is clearly in flexion, and I can lean up and like lean my torso over, kind of similar to a squat. However, the main thing being this hip flexion is possible with a neutral spine. So I can do it if I have the support of a stool. You can assess this in like a quad rock that we'll cover later, but essentially you just go on hands and knees with active feet, so that means getting on your toes rather than having them pointed. And then if you can rock yourself backwards and maintain a neutral spine with hip and knee flexion going on, you're probably cool in terms of mobility. So if you still can't squat upright for whatever reason, it's probably a control or a stability issue, or something else isn't, you're losing position for some other reason. It's not that you can't squat or you're immobile or something. You can clearly get your hip in the position, you just have to do it under the conditions of stood up and loaded in some way, which we'll get into later. Another common one is ankles. People's ankles get really gummed up. You'll have probably seen people do the knee to wall test, where you set up with your toes next to a wall, touch it with your knee, shuffle your toes back, touch it with your knee again. You can sometimes get around this issue just by having Olympic shoes or a heel lift. The only difference is it essentially shortens your minimum distance on the knee touch. Essentially, like a decent knee touch distance is between 3 and 5 inches, I think. If you have a heel lifted shoe, like an Olympic style shoe, like Romelio's or Adi Powers or some shit, it takes it down to just that 3 inches. So if you set up 3 inches from a wall in your Olympic shoes and you can't touch your knee to that wall without like 10 out of 10 effort, your ankles are pretty fucking gummed up and you're not going to get that much range. Obviously, if you're closer to the 5, you're going to have a lot easier time with it, but you can kind of get by with 3. And the other one is mainly general core weakness. Like a lot of the time, if people squat and they get a kind of pinchy feeling in their hip crease, again, shouldn't really happen. It shouldn't feel too bad considering you're closing this joint. Like, it should feel reasonable. The only way to kind of tell the difference between that is going into something called a hip scour, which is essentially a kind of passive assessment of how your hips go together, and you can kind of find out where you get your best range or which part of your hip is the most comfortable, and you should be likely squatting and deadlifting using as close to that kind of line of travel for your leg as possible, because otherwise it's going to feel like shit and you're not going to do very well. The other side of that would be if your core is actually weak, which again will happen if you're super, or maybe not even super mobile. Sometimes people are just super weak and can't support themselves with the right muscles. So we've got a couple of drills that will kind of assess that and see if it is some core weakness stuff. Again, people's core stuff could always be better. It's not so much that everything is super weak, like you can't lift. It's more just it needs to be the right things doing the core stabilizing. That pinchy feeling I talked about can either be when your kind of femur runs into your hip capsule or runs into your actual hip bone because you have deep hip sockets with like an encompassing hip joint, or sometimes it's just hip flexors trying to do the work of your anterior core because your anterior core is not doing its job, and so they're trying to pick up the slack. It can also be the same reason why you get a lot of adductor pain or tightness, because they're trying to compensate for interior core musculature not doing its job. So we've got some stuff to turn that on. Cool, so hip scour that we just talked about, super easy. Again, you can do it either with the help of an accountability buddy or you can do it yourself. So to do it, sit your butt down on the floor, lie down, put your feet up, have your head neutral against the floor. Then what you're going to do is take your favorite leg, cuddle it with both hands, and then jack up into some deep hip flexion, making sure to keep your tailbone on the floor. So if you start hip lifting like this, kind of like a one-legged hip lift, or your tailbone comes off the floor, stop and go back down. You essentially just want to jack your knee as close to your pec as you can, let your foot track wherever it tracks. And if this position isn't super deep, or you get to kind of like midway through and you're like, this feels like hot shit, like I really don't like this, likely that there's something funky going on in the hip. The next thing to do will be to ease off, abduct the leg, so let it fall out towards here, again making sure to keep this hip on the floor. So if you go and abduct out and this comes up, you need to put that back down. Let this abduct and do the same thing, try to stick it up into your armpit, and you might find that you get a whole load more range out here than you do straight up and down. And if you do, it's probably likely that you should be squatting with your feet a bit wider. Again, it also might make sumo pulling a better option for you. If you find conventional really sucks and you find you struggle to get back position or your hips hurt or something, it would probably be beneficial for you to try it out at the very least, because you clearly have a much better time of it when your hips are abducted and maybe even your feet are turned out. So quad rock, aka the quadruped rock. Again, it's not anything cool. Essentially all we're going to do is go hands and knees, put your knees about shoulder width apart, or if you've already done the hip scour, about as close to where you found the most comfortable. So again, if you found it much more comfy to be really abducted, get your knees a bit wider. If you were totally fine with your knees like right up the pipe, then put them straight up and down right in the middle. Essentially going to go on your hands and knees to start with. We're going to look for as close to neutral spine as we can get. Again, you've got to kind of feel it out with your pelvic tilt, have a friend spot you, so essentially you don't want like hella rounding and you don't want like hella Donald Duck extension. Keep active on the feet, which means keep your toes up, and then you're essentially just going to sink backwards and try and see if you can maintain neutral spine. Again, with the help of a spot, you might find you like round out at the bottom, which again, if you get to the point where you round, just stop, try and achieve a more neutral position, and then carry on getting deeper. See how that goes. Again, having someone to spot or videoing it will help a lot. If you're totally fine with that on your hands and knees, you can progress to your elbows, which essentially will give you a more forward torso angle, kind of like you're upright and squatting. So you go from hands to elbows, and then repeat the same drill of like sit back. If you round out at all, stop, try and achieve a bit more of a neutral place, and then sit a bit deeper down. Again, the whole point of this being, if you can sit hella below parallel in this position with all this support, your hips will squat that deep. You just need to figure it out standing up, which is what we're going to get to next. Cool. So from the quad rock, which is kind of like step one on squat progressions, you can essentially build on this with different exercises. Again, we assessed at the start of what you actually need, as in if you're just looking to get quad pumps and get some actual like leg volume going on, and you don't have to do it for anything specific. Again, sport training included. Nobody squats with a barbell on their back for their sport except powerlifters, so you can work around this for pretty much everyone. The next step on the road is just a bodyweight squat to box. Again, plenty of people have done box squats before. Just set up near the corner of a box, or med ball or stool or something that essentially will give you a proprioceptive cue below parallel so that you'll be able to feel. You're not going to be sitting on it, you're just going to be touching it. So set up, again, find a shoulder or find a foot position that's close to the one you found most comfortable in the hip scour that we did earlier. Set up, again, if you're looking for something to do with your hands, first off, easiest position is just up here on the chest. The next position would be hands on head with elbows forward. And again, if you want to really challenge thoracic extension like you would if you wanted to use a bar on your back, you put your elbows out with hands on head. Again, even as you do that, you will feel all your upper back turn on. So standard would be hands to the front, chest nice and upright, abs on, control down, touch the box, come back up. Again, looking for the same stuff we were looking for before. If there's any kind of bottoming out, we'll have to regress and make sure you can control that on the quad rock position. And then if not, then we can build on it to this position. Again, maybe a higher box and then just work your way down. So next exercise on the progression list would be a goblet squat. Again, quite a few people should probably be familiar with this. It's a pretty common one that gets chucked about. Key thing, try to do it with a dumbbell if it's all possible, mainly because the two discs will act as 2 points of contact on your sternum and like kind of below your ribs. The idea being that to maintain an upright torso, you want to make sure you are in contact with both parts of the dumbbell all the way through. So usually you start with the dumbbell on the floor, squat down, pick it up, wrestle with it a little bit. Again, take into account that if you're trying to program this for someone who's like coming off a back injury, just trying to pick up stuff off the floor is not as easy as everyone else has it. Again, you want to maintain 2 points of contact. I don't know if you can see that underneath my arm. But what we don't want to do is sit hella back and lose that bottom part. We want to keep nice and upright. Again, you can cuddle it with your forearms a little bit and make sure and squat down, keeping both points of contact, and then squat back up. No box. However, any of these progressions you can add a box into if there's a control issue. You'll typically get some people who like dive bomb real fast and just bottom out and lose all kind of control. Having the box that they have to touch will hopefully add a bit more control to their squat speed. So fourth on our little 5 list of stuff in terms of squat progression, next one up would be a front squat. Again, it might be a bit of a controversial opinion to put front squats below back squats in terms of technical difficulty, but I feel like if you can nail a front squat, you're probably totally fine for any kind of back squatting, just cause front squats are going to be going to require a much more upright position, and you're definitely going to have all kinds of thoracic and shoulder mobility if you can hold a front rack as well. But if you can't hold the front rack, that's not a problem. You can do it cross style. Again, you can hold the bar cross hands. As long as it's on your collarbone, just kind of like behind your front delt essentially, you're probably quite cool. So, because I don't have my high heels on, I'm going to use these ankle lifts. Again, some people are super uncool using ankle lift, like a heel lift. Sorry, not ankle lift. Heel lift all the time. Again, unless you're going to be competing in some aspect that does not let you use these and you need to front squat in that kind of environment, who cares? Like, you can work through your ankle range as well as getting some training in. Funnily enough, a really good way to get a load of deep ankle dorsiflexion is to load up a squat and squat deep on your ankles. Works pretty good. So, set up, either use a front rack position or a cross grip, whichever is comfiest for you, or you can do your hands like straight out, just anything that will make it stick, or a cross grip, again, up on your heel lifts, sit nice down, and then back up. Pretty simples. Next one up, back squat, everyone should know that. Hi guys, just doing an outro to the squat progression video. The last move on the whole movement progression thing would be a back squat. Again, it's not included in this in a video because if you get there you should probably know how to back squat with a barbell. And again, assuming you step through every one of these progressions correctly, you should be totally fine. So it's not got its own separate video. If you run into any issues with any of these kind of progressions, regression things, this does cover most of the common ones. However, there's obviously other ones that it could be. But that's something you'd have to sort out yourself. These are just some bigger issues. However, it should help you identify what your issues are and definitely help you in narrowing down the amount of problem solving you have to do. Other than that, catch us on ATS approved, all social media. Cute dogs optional. Catch you guys later.